Welcome to Blind Spots, a podcast where we're helping you fill the gap between what you want to do with your money and what you actually do. We are professional investors, writers, and financial planners helping you navigate the complexities of finance to optimize what you can control and cut out the rest. Join your host, Nick Shermans and Aaron Varghese, as we discuss the questions and nuances surrounding everyday money management. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Blind Spots. In this episode, we are going to be talking all about money scripts and how your personal experiences change the way that you view money.
What the hell is a money script?
Okay. A money script is your unconscious beliefs about money. Find that they are often rooted in childhood or other experiences that you have, and they tend to affect your behaviors and perspectives surrounding money.
So, for example, a parent that had a extreme view towards money, extremely frugal, or spent money out the wazoo, that would be an example of a potential money script that influenced the way the child could feel or think about money.
Absolutely.
Okay. We just thought that it would be a good idea to define that phrase for our listeners, because I didn't know what a money script was. I just called it something different. So
I think money script, money story. I don't know what other ones are out there, but.
Well, why? Well, how could that be helpful? Why would it be helpful for someone to understand and define their own personal money script?
Well, we find when people are making financial decisions, there's usually some cognitive and emotional biases, kind of like we talked about in one of our recent episodes. And the way that people have experienced money in the past, like we just said, influence their decisions that they make now. And it can be positive or it could be negative. And so we like to unpack what experiences they have had so we can help them work through some of those decisions that they're facing today.
So acknowledging your money script, or at least being aware of your money script, can help you, one, continue doing the positive things that your personal money script allows you to do, but also to understand, avoid, mitigate, reduce some of the destructive behaviors. Because one thing I always say is money is very emotional, and we all have personal baggage throughout our life experience that influences the way we think, feel, and use money. And part of this episode is to help you unpack that, because it's not obvious to some, and you might have had an experience in your childhood or your early adulthood that really influences the way you operate about money, and you might not know it. So we're going to use some real life examples of things that we've seen. We'll share some personal experiences just to help you get the conversation going, because everybody's money script is going to be different.
I think that money tends to be kind of a taboo topic, and people are generally uncomfortable talking about money. So this is an episode just to kind of get your mind thinking, maybe spark some conversations in your household or with your friend group to help everyone just make better money decisions. So Nick, I'll ask you again, what is your first memory that you have about money? It doesn't have to be big or deep. Do you remember any just learning about money, thoughts about money?
I mean, are we talking in the early days, like the early days?
I mean, sure, anything.
This might sound really stupid, and this is before your time for sure.
Answer.
But our older listeners will recall back in the, I'd say, mid 80s or late 80s, there were these gold coins that were chock full of chocolate. Right? They were gold and they were shaped like nickels and quarters and dimes. That's how I kind of learned about what a quarter was or what a dime was. And my dad used to shovel candy down my throat, which is why I have so many cavities or had so many cavities. But that was probably my earliest memory about money. And then my parents did give me an allowance. So I grew up on like an acre and a half, which is not, I mean, it's huge by today's standards based on the types of lots these home builders are building. But I had to mow the lawn and I had to do yard work and yada, yada. My parents did pay me. So that was my earliest memory of money. And I had this grotesque, like pink piggy bank with a yellow lid that I used to put money into. And it smelled horrible. I don't know where my parents got it, but that was my money war chest. And I would just put things in. I'd always look at it at night and see how much I'd have. I'd count it over and over again. Those two things are probably my earliest memories of money, and that probably doesn't make me sound too flattering, but that's what it was.
So if you were tracking your money and savings at such an early age, did you find that that impacted how well you managed money when you got a little bit older and money became more meaningful?
I mean, this is going to sound stupid, but as a kid, I used to kind of be a hoarder. I would like to hoard things and then look at it at night. Like I would hoard shoes and look at it at night, money and look at it at night. During the 4th of
Yeah.
July, my dad and I would buy a bunch of fireworks, and every night leading up to the 4th, I would admire my collection. Did the same
Mhm.
thing with Legos. So I've really kicked that habit now. I'm more of the opposite, but I just like to collect, and I didn't have any use for it. I just like to collect and look, collect and look. I did it over and over again.
Interesting.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
I can talk about my early career and how I viewed money and versus how I view it now. Maybe that could get the juices going for some of our listeners. And I'd also love to hear from you because this isn't a one-man show here.
Why don't we start with just talking about some of the various money scripts that are out there and how they can be a positive or a negative?
Yeah, let's start on the extremes.
So one that we've got is, usually when we kind of start this conversation with clients is they think about the extreme end on the frugal side, and they'll say, how they grew up, they didn't have money to do XYZ. And oftentimes for those people who lived ultra frugally, they have a hard time turning that off once they hit retirement and are constantly in the pursuit of more. We've talked about how you can't turn off that growth mindset. So that's one that we see that's really quite common.
Let's pause there on the frugal side, right?
Mhm.
So the penny pincher. So a lot of folks, this comes like these money scripts on the frugal side comes from really two things in my experience. One, it's who your parents were and the time that they lived and where they grew up.
Yeah.
So many of our clients, their parents or grandparents lived through the Great Depression, saw post World War II, how difficult that was. And it really shaped the way that they viewed money. So those close to you as you were growing up tend to influence your personal attitude towards money, even if you know that or not. The second thing, and this is kind of tied in, but is the economic backdrop during your, I'd say, teens to early career, right? I mean, when you're 6 years old and you're going through a depression, you don't know anything from Adam. But as you start to put your big boy pants or big girl pants on and look for a job and earn money, you start to pay attention to the stock market, to what the economy is doing, to what people are saying. And if you're coming up during a difficult time, that could influence the way you feel about money, thus leading to more of a frugal mindset. So people close to you and the economic backdrop during that time when you were aware and starting your career.
Mhm. On the other side of things, we have the people who, there's a term for it. Anyways, on the other side of
Spendthrifts.
things, yeah, that could be it. But kind of like where it's rooted from. But spendthrift is a good term for it too. But just people who are just constantly spending too much, living way beyond their means. And I think that those people tend to have a hard time focusing on tomorrow. They're just worried about today and what they can accomplish today with the money that they have. And if something happens in the future, they haven't even really thought about it or planned for it.
Well, and for those folks, it might be a little different, but a couple things stick out to me. One is keeping up with the Joneses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people are constantly comparing themselves to others. And I've said this before, back in the 70s, you would look across the street, you would look in your family circle, you'd look down the block. Everybody was basically doing a variation of the same thing. If you lived in a average American town, you drove the same cars, you went to the same schools, you wore the same clothes, you had houses that looked the same. Now with social media, you can get online and in seconds compare yourself to a bunch of strangers, to famous people. And it's really not talked about enough, but I think that's where a lot of our spendthrift ways, instant gratification come from, comparing ourselves to others, where it used to be this small pool. Now it's basically the entire world. And it can make you feel bad, like you're not where you should be in life and you don't make enough money. So what a lot of people do is they spend money to show that they have money, which is the quickest way to have less money. So it's quite the opposite conundrum. But I think if you're not aware of that pitfall, it's an easy thing to get into, and it's not good.
I was just looking at that book that I have on my shelf to remember the title, but in the book, The Psychology of Money, I think it's in this one, but they talk about how wealth is not shown.
It's not
Can't
visible.
remember.
It's true wealth is what you
Yes.
don't see.
Yes, that's the line. So good. And it's so true. Because I think there's often so many times where people will say like, oh, look at the car they're driving. They must have so much money or something. Oftentimes people who have the nicest, best things don't have the money to back it up. So I don't know. It's one of those things, but that's another common money script that we see in some clients. Another big one is money worship, putting your career and pursuit of money and wealth building above other things like your health or your family.
Well, and we've talked about that. It's really hard to turn off for a lot of people. So most people are saving, investing, taking risks their entire life. And once they reach an age where they have enough and they can retire and do what they want, they still have that mindset of building and growing and taking risks. And look, most people that are listening to this podcast, most of us are never going to be the richest person in the world. At some point, you have to put your flag in the ground and say, hey, look, I've done enough. I have enough to feed myself, to do the things that I want to do with who I want to do them with, when I want to do it. I think it's an underrated acknowledgement to reach that point. A lot of people never reach that point, and they end up taking risks where the best case won't change their life, but the worst case could derail their plan. And so that's part of the psychology of money in which we talk about, is getting people that are in this wealth building mindset to downshift into the enough mindset, to be grateful, to have gratitude, to be content, to be measured in how you take risks, to be very intentional with the way that you spend your money or the activities in which you embark on. So it's a subtle thing, it's a small thing, but it can be very impactful when you talk about a successful or an unsuccessful retirement outcome.
The last one that we see commonly in many clients is money avoidance. That when topics are too complex or it becomes overwhelming, oftentimes people will just avoid the topic, avoid the conversation, and oftentimes do nothing. And we've talked about in other podcast episodes where doing nothing is oftentimes the worst thing that you can do.
Yeah, so money is complex. There's a lot of rules, tax laws change, saving rates change. You've got 401ks and IRAs and Roths and taxable accounts and Medicare and Social Security. Like this stuff is really complex. And I've talked about mental models before and mental shortcuts. And what humans do when things are complex, they either ignore them or overly simplify. And I'm a fan of overly simplifying if the framework makes sense. Like I think a truly genius person can take a complex topic and make it simple, but ignoring it is what we see more often than not. And it's not going to make the problem go away. The anxiety is going to build as time passes. You know, we've met a lot of people that think they're so far behind or they've done the wrong thing. And that might be true. It might not be true, but it's never too late to make a positive change. So the good news is in 2023, there's a lot of information online. There's a lot of good resources online. You have independent professionals like us at Pure Portfolios that help people unpack this stuff all day, every day. So the tools are there. And I know it can seem daunting. It can seem like a big thing, but making small progress equals big things. So we encourage those that feel lost or are confused to start today. And you would be surprised how much progress you can make just by getting started.
So we're going to give you some questions to ask yourself, some self-reflection that you could pause and kind of journal about it through watching or listening to this podcast. You can save it for later, talk about it with a friend or a spouse, but I think these are good questions to chat about. So, you want me to just run through them?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. What was your feeling about money like in the home where you grew up? What was the feeling like about spending money? What was the feeling like about saving money? What was the feeling like about giving money away? What was your earliest money memory? What messages did your mother or father pass down to you about money? Keep in mind that messages are different than lessons about money, like how to balance a checkbook, how to pay a credit card. These would be things that they would maybe talk about, comments that they would make to each other or other people or to you. Do you remember hearing your parents talk about money or fight about money? Growing up, did you have less than or more than or about the same as your peers? Did you feel or sense a difference? And that's it.
Okay. Yeah, no, so I think those are all good. And to put a bow on this, I think look at your parents, look at your siblings, look at the economic times in which your grandparents, your parents, and even you came up in. And then the third thing is think about your own experiences. Like it's easy to hear stuff about money, but once you start doing, like early in my career, I've used this example in the past. I was really eager to buy my first house. I was 25. I was ready to be a grown up. I bought my first house. The real estate market crashed in 2008. Like I couldn't have timed it worse. And I just had a really sour taste in my mouth about real estate. And, I didn't really blame anybody. I didn't blame myself. It was just the arc in my life called for me to buy a house. But when I didn't want to live in the place I was living anymore and I went to go sell, I had to stay there for a couple of years because my house was worth less than my mortgage was. And again, it just was a really foul experience. And people talk about real estate investing and passive income and passive income and rental income. I think that's fine, but that experience tainted that for me. I'll never be a landlord. I'll never buy real estate. It's not passive to me. But I can talk to one of my best friends and he's made
Loves
a
it.
massive amount of wealth by investing in real estate. So again, that's how a personal experience can shape your view towards money. And I just tend to gravitate to what I know, and that's the equity markets, that's financial markets, that's what I'm comfortable in. A lot of real estate people aren't comfortable doing that. So that's just one real life example that you can learn a lot by doing. So the whole point of all this is for you, the listener, you could be a client, you could not be a client. Talk to your spouse, talk to those close to you, ask their opinion too about how they perceive your attitude towards money. And then getting all this feedback, thinking about where you came up, who your parents, who your grandparents were, your own personal experiences, you can start to craft your own money scripts. And the goal is to do more of what you do right and to avoid or at least understand some of the pitfalls in which you fall into. Because look, money is emotional. And there's been no shortage of things going on in financial markets the last couple of years. And I think if you can understand your blind spots, understand your biases, you can make better money decisions.
Got one last question for you before we sign off. We have
Okay.
got a lot of clients that are in different phases of life. A lot of times we talk about retirement, but is there anything that you are doing with your young children to help shape the way that they view money in a positive way?
I don't know how much time I have, but I have done a couple things. One, I've started paying them to do chores. So I pay them to do chores. I give them money. I don't tell them how to spend it. But when they do want to buy something, and look, most kids nowadays have too much stuff, just stuff everywhere. If they say, Daddy, I want to buy something, I ask them questions. Are you sure you need that? Are you sure you're not going to play for that for a week and then it's discarded? Are you sure? I'm pretty sure I saw something that looks just like that in your room, right? So ask them questions and get them to come to the conclusion that they probably don't need that. And then the other thing that I did was my kids like, what's the name of the video game? It's like Rollerblocks. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I think it's Roblox.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
I showed them that's a publicly traded company, and we bought a couple shares of stock. And probably once a month, I'll bring it up on my iPhone and I'll show them, okay, this is what we bought it at. This is where it's at today. That means we made $5. And most times they don't really care. They don't really get it, but it's just like small things, small hints.
I mean, that's a huge introduction that I have no idea what the figure is, but I would probably say more than 75% of kids would not get exposure to something like that.
Yeah, so just playing games like that and bringing it back to stuff that they like. So they like going to Starbucks. Well, we can own part of Starbucks. We can buy Starbucks stock. And then, what is that, Daddy? Okay, well, when you buy a stock, you're buying a ownership share in a business. It's not just a made up piece of paper, right? So you own part of the profits of that company. And then that leads to more questions. So just tying things that they like, bringing it back around to money. We haven't really got into, like, I've tried to explain saving and investing.
It's age appropriate.
it's just easier to show them, like, you can buy ownership of a company. Hopefully it goes up over time. And, rather than spend today, we can save. And then once you come across something that you really like, we can spend the money. We talk about vacations. Like I took the kids to Disneyland. I always ask them, how much do you think this costs? Like when we go to the grocery store, when we go out to eat, when we go to Disneyland. Of course, their answers are wildly off, but it's nice to have those conversations that this stuff isn't free. It costs money. To get money, you have to work and save and be diligent. So I guess I do more than probably the average, but there's really no playbook. It's just being comfortable talking about money with your kids is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that people will often struggle with is when they had a certain experience with money, usually it being negative and wanting to kind of flip that script, pun intended, is that it is possible to do, but that's a whole other podcast topic. So anyways, if you learned anything from this episode, shoot us a note. But as always, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at insight@pureportfolios.com. And we will see you in the next one.